So I saw this book, Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman, in a bookstore that I was just in, and I loved the cover and I loved this tagline of an epic tale of medieval horror. I couldn't really imagine what that was. And since I'm working on a D&D game now, I wanted to immerse myself more in fantasy storytelling and like medieval storytelling in general. So I picked it up and I'm really glad I did. I haven't read his other stuff, but I really want to now because I really loved Between Two Fires. So because of the tagline medieval horror, I was expecting much more of a like historical fiction or a grounded story within our history. And at the beginning, it uses those expectations, and it is kind of what I got for the first couple of chapters. But over time, it slowly evolves into something more epic and mythical. It kind of reminds me of how the Dark Souls games or Bloodborne or other FromSoft games slowly evolve over the course of their stories. And I also didn't expect the story to be so episodic and almost like quests in a video game. And it was really satisfying and reminded me of things of like The Last of Us and God of War 2018, and this came out years before those. The writing is really accessible, but also detailed in the way he describes specific things like key parts of a creature or the way someone reacts to a specific piece of information. I really found that easier to read and kind of pulled me into the world, even when it does use all these kind of like terms I don't necessarily understand. It's inside of something that's easier to kind of digest. And he also does a good job of balancing the tone in the story as well. There's balancing the spiritual and like the really grim, dark stuff, but there's also a lot of humor and humanity in the book that I latched onto with these characters. They have very clear voices, and where they don't even say, hey, this character says this line, I understand generally who is saying it because of how distinct their voices are. And speaking of the characters, I love the trio at the forefront of this story. They're the ones that we primarily follow, and they're very distinct from each other and do a great job of bouncing off of each other relationship-wise. And seeing their relationship grow is really, really satisfying because they don't necessarily start at a very friendly place, and the internal character growth and external character growth is really awesome to see. The writer does this thing where he'll bounce between character perspectives, usually at the beginning of a chapter, and he doesn't actually tell you who you're looking at the world through. So as you're starting to read a chapter, you'll have to reorient yourself and figure out whose eyes you're looking through and whose perspective you're reading. And it creates these really interesting reveals because as you're reading, you're realizing that you're learning about something that was just teased about at the beginning of the story, and it gives you a lot of time to dive into the internal monologue of these main characters and even these interesting supporting characters as well. I think he does a good job with these little surprises. Sometimes, because of the way the book is written, it is a little confusing when it does go to characters that are not these main three characters, because you have to kind of figure out who we're talking about. And sometimes he'll do this thing where he'll replace the character's name with a specific term. And you have to figure out which specific term he's using for these supporting characters. That part is sometimes a little hard to follow, but over time, I kind of got used to the flow. He does this thing where he writes these little italicized interjections that aren't attributed to any character speaking. And as you keep reading, you realize that these are like stream of consciousness thoughts, or like intrusive thoughts. And it's cool because sometimes they're not thoughts that are necessarily originated from the character that has the thought. So as you're reading about new characters and you're diving into the minds of our main characters, you see these italicized thoughts and are thinking about like how humanity is a vessel for good and evil ideas, or, you know, in this book, angels and demons, and the way humanity has this internal goodness, but also the external influences that get us to do specific things. And along with that, I think there's some really interesting parallels of the book's depiction of like fanaticism, corruption, cults, and like modern day fanaticism. It does feel like sometimes there's a literal devil speaking in someone's ears. And I think that even plays into the title of the book. Between Two Fires being a literal description of this journey that the characters are going on, bouncing between burning towns, but also being caught between heaven and hell and this war that is being waged, and also the characters themselves being trapped between despair and faith. I love the way he explores all these themes, and it's really strengthened by the episodic structure, because as these characters are bouncing between all these towns, the book sets up this interesting episodic pacing where the characters, after an adventure, it almost sets back to neutral and they go back to what it was, and then they just continue on, and then you read the new chapter title and you're like, oh, what does that mean? And then it's like, oh, you meet the villain of the week and you learn about this villain's powers. And then it bounces to the characters as they come into this town. And you're like, oh, how are they going to deal with this new force? And they continue to explore different themes every single time that they do this. It constantly pulls you in and keeps you hooked, because there's always more and more and more insane stuff happening around the next corner. And it reminds me kind of like of The Witcher or Supernatural, where you're just waiting to see what kind of insane stuff is about to happen to these characters. And similar to some of the things I referenced at the beginning of this video, like Supernatural, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, there's a great escalation in the episodic structure too, where it starts small and you're dealing with small problems, but with each subsequent episode, it gets more cosmic and mythological, and that really drew me in. And I won't go into too much detail, but I loved the ending of this story. It's not just another episode, it does wrap everything up beautifully, and there's an epilogue that is really emotionally impactful, and it was a great way to end all of these characters' stories. Overall, I love how Between Two Fires balances really human, emotional, intimate stories, but also with these big, epic, mythological stakes, and the tonal balance too of grim, dark, but also beauty really helps sell all the themes that it's trying to do. And it does a good job communicating all these themes as characters are being bounced between these extremes. So yeah, Between Two Fires, I highly recommend it. Let me know if you have any recommendations based on this. I'm always looking for more books to read, and thank you for watching.